want you to watch a minute of this Tic Tok video from a fellow named Matthew Flegler. He's out of Ontario. By all accounts, just an average guy, works in insurance, part-time firefighter, and he's talking about oil and gas lobbyists in Alberta. And the reason this is important is because, in my experience, this is how Canadians outside of Alberta think of Alberta. They just can't wrap their heads around what goes on in Alberta politics and the influence of the oil and gas industry. So here, have a look.
Imagine for a minute that a senior member of a premier's government scheduled a secret meeting with oil industry lobbyists to discuss the province's policies. And at this secret meeting, the lobbyists present an agenda that includes a proposal to have the province implement new subsidies for the oil industry and a strategy to fight government rules on pollution and ways to throw up roadblocks to prevent renewable energy projects from being developed. And at this meeting, the lobbyists also present the senior government official with a bailout plan for a company that is nearly bankrupt but facing a multi-million-dollar fine for sites they have contaminated but refuse to clean up. What would you think about that? About a government that is supposedly operating in a free democracy but breaks the law in dealings with lobbyists?
Okay, now I want to make 3 points about this. First of all, and Matthew, listen up, Danielle Smith was an oil and gas lobbyist prior to becoming premier in 2022. 2019, while she was president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, she also registered as a lobbyist, and her intent was to lobby for something called the R-Star program. So there are 80,000 inactive oil and gas wells. There's about $100 billion or more of conventional oil and gas environmental liabilities. And R-Star would have provided a credit to companies to clean up some of their wells. And it was billed as a $20 billion program, but economics professor Andrew Leach, if I remember correctly, calculated that the actual cost to the Treasury would only be $6 billion. So this idea that somehow it's illegal for lobbyists to meet with the Alberta government when the Alberta government is led by a premier who actually was an oil and gas lobbyist. And by the way, it's not illegal. Okay, the lobbyists can register with the government, and then they are free to. There's obviously some ethical guidelines, but they're free to meet with the government, talk to various departments, and even the premier if they want. And this goes back a long ways. I remember hearing stories about oil and gas CEOs would phone up a premier and he would take their call because that's the way it is in Alberta. The industry rules the roost. Okay, so that's point number one. The second is, I interviewed about 3 years ago Janet Brown, who's a very reputable Calgary pollster, and she said that her data showed that over 50% of Albertans identify so strongly with the oil and gas industry that an attack on the industry, attack on oil and gas, is seen by them as an attack on their own identity. So what this tells me is we talk about here at Energi Media, we talk about how the oil and gas industry has captured the oil and gas regulator, the Alberta Energy Regulator, how it's captured the government, how it's captured politicians. But in truth, the oil and gas industry in Alberta has captured the culture. It's been like this for a long time. You go back into the 1938 when they created the first regulator, and there's 4 or 5 iterations since, but they talked about what are we doing here? We want the industry to be healthy, and our first priority is the financial health of the oil and gas industry. Then we want to get capital from them, we want them to create jobs, and we want government revenues. Those were the 4 priorities, and as a consequence, the oil and gas industry wields an enormous amount of political clout in Alberta. And I guess that's the third thing. This is the way it's always been. And if you wonder why the premier sounds like an oil and gas CEO, it's because essentially she's their mouthpiece. And I mention this, it's hard, especially people in Eastern Canada. If you're in Western Canada, you live in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, probably, you hear a lot more of this kind of news. But when I talk to folks in Eastern Canada, this is like a thunderclap. It's like, what? You had an oil lobbyist become a premier? Oh, and by the way, this R-Star program that she was lobbying for, I forgot to mention this. She brought it forward when she became premier, and the reaction from the Albertans was still really upset. They did not want to pay to clean up the industry's old wells. So she took it back, and then after, let the furor die down, and then she came back with a little pilot project. I think it was $110 million, and that didn't, the number was small enough that nobody really got upset about that. And then it was earlier this year or late last year, came back with a mature asset strategy. So different approach, different name, same objective, to get the government to pay for the industry's old assets that have been sitting there for years or decades, and they're never going to produce again, and they haven't been properly, they're not plugged and reclaimed. So Matthew, I appreciate your outrage, but really, dude, it is, anybody from Alberta who watches your video is going to have a good chuckle, because it is so much worse than you actually know.